Abujo, Stano, Sego, Wache. I'd like to start off with a territorial acknowledgement. We acknowledge the University of Waterloo is situated on the Haldimand Tract, land granted in a legally binding treaty to the Haudenosaunee of the Six Nations of the Grand River. The land inside and surrounding the Haldimand Tract, including our Stratford campus, is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Attawandaron, and the Anishinaabe. My name is Jean Becker, and I am the Senior Director, Indigenous Initiatives at the University of Waterloo. The video you are about to watch is a re-recording of a presentation originally given during Treaties Recognition 2020. We experienced technical difficulties during the recording and are fortunate to re-record for you. Thank you for seeking out this invaluable information surrounding the history of the Haldimand Tract. You will be hearing from an expert on the subject today. I'd like to welcome and introduce Mr. Phil Monture. Phil is Mohawk from the Six Nations of the Grand River. He has spent many years working in the area of land claims, land rights, research, and research programming. Phil was the director of the Land Claims Research Office at Six Nations of the Grand River for 27 years and remains active in Six Nations land rights issues. Phil owns Native Lands Limited, where he utilizes his expertise in the areas of land tenure and land rights for Indigenous people across Canada, the U.S., and Central America. He is a sought-out and seasoned presenter and facilitator and has been heavily involved in planning, facilitating, and presenting at notable summits such as the National Land Claims Research Summit. We are absolutely thrilled to have Phil present to the University of Waterloo community. Thank you so very much, Phil, for being a part of the University of Waterloo's inaugural Treaties Recognition Week and for agreeing to return so we could re-record the presentation. We are really excited to have this available to our community ongoingly. So without further ado, over to you, Phil.
Thank you so much. Sego, everyone. As Yoga Bear would say, deja vu all over again. For the technical difficulties, we're going to give it another run. Okay, this is actually a great honor because I think when I go around and we talk with people, various governments, municipalities, student bodies such as what we have here today, and general population, there's such a void of knowledge about our lands, the Indigenous, especially the Six Nations Haudenosaunee lands and relationships with the Crown, and it's very difficult for newcomers to this land and generations to understand why our relationship with the land seems to be so different and sacred to us. It's hard to explain that, but that's really what it means. I guess one thing is I'll begin with our first relationship with the newcomers to this territories. It's called Gaswenta, or the Turo Wampum. The first treaty, and it is a treaty, although it's not a written document as one would know today. It's how we did the Haudenosaunee, Iroquois, and Six Nations people. I'll use those words interchangeable here. Five Nations as well. Secured agreements of understanding is when the Dutch and the Haudenosaunee discovered each other upon the Dutch arriving upon their shore. An agreement was made as to how we were to treat each other and live together in peace and friendship. Each would have their own ways, which would be shown by the purple row running the length of the wampum belt, as you can see on this on the display. And one row is a ship with our white brother ways, and the other a canoe with our ways. Each would travel down the river of life side by side. Neither one attempting to steer the other boat, staying in respecting each other's differences, their ways, their traditions, and not trying to govern each other. And that's how we were. Our first real treaty with the newcomers were with the Dutch in 1613. And the British, who later came, were quite jealous of this relationship we had established with the Dutch, and they wanted one similar. So in 1664, the British sought out and secured to have the same governance agreement for peace, friendship, and respect as we move forward. So that was our relationship and how we were to treat each other as we move forward as allies in this land as we know today. Throughout this territory, there were, the Iroquois were quite dominant, and we had trade wars, and it mainly had to do with our beaver hunting grounds throughout all of this territory. Our main base was actually in New York State, but throughout all of these territories was the beaver hunting grounds for trade, and that was the commerce of the day. The Erie and Neutral, they were of Iroquois relations with us, same culture, same language, and they were pretty well absorbed by the Iroquois, the Five Nations. But since we were allies of Great Britain, of the British, we were actually the pawns in the war between the British and the French. And our neighbors, our relatives, the Hurons, they were allies with the French. So through the Indian Wars, we had basically conquered, because of those differences, we had conquered the Hurons for the fur trade. And with that, it was governance over the Southern Ontario territory. And that was a big difference because the French were all that not great to friends with the Five Nations. So once the next treaty that we had entered into with the British was called the 1701 Nanfan or Fort Albany Treaty. And with that, because this land had been conquered from the Hurons, it was an area of 400 miles by 800 miles. And it's not just Southern Ontario, but it's a vast area. We allowed the king to place his castles upon our lands, and that would be for protection against any invasion by the French. As I said, we were kind of the middleman, the pawns that were being used to control this area. And it actually pitted us against our neighbors, the Hurons, as well. And this treaty was acknowledged in the Treaty of Tract in 1713 as that the Five Nations specifically would not be molested between the areas of Ontario, Huron, and Erie. And we'd be able to carry on the free trade as we had always done. And then you have the Royal Proclamation that was established. And, we look at that a bit differently. It's kind of, in a way, it was viewed to be controlling and putting notice to the newcomers on how they were to deal with the native lands, because there was a lot of trespass going on at that time into our territories. Newcomers didn't know that these were our lands. And it was actually the Senecas who were quite vigilant in protecting their lands, and they said if the king was not going to control their inhabitants, that we certainly would. And it led into some, shall we say, nasty skirmishes through the Susquehannas and Pennsylvania's areas, as well as through New York State areas. So the Royal Proclamation was passed, and that set up the first rules and regulations that lands would be protected. I guess we looked at it as a bit of a different issue when it comes to coming down on how to control Native people. We don't accept that because that would kind of feed into the doctrine of discovery as having a valid standing. You know, it's been put down now by the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and well, it's an issue that still needs to be reckoned with in today's government with Canada and our relationships. How do they gain control over, purported control over our lands, resources, and our people for that matter? So that's the contentious issue of the Royal Proclamation, whereas other Indigenous nations across Canada, I think the Royal Proclamations like the Magna Carta, that everything started from that, when in fact it didn't. We had, as I just pointed out, much earlier treaties and relationships and governing principles than the 17th Royal Proclamation brought in. Being allies of the British and our treaty with the Goswenta, and part of that relationship also meant that when our allies needed help, going to it further, we had the principle of the covenant chain, that we would always renew and polish our relationship with our allies. In this case, it was the British. And whenever they would need help, they would rattle the chain, and we would actually, being allies, would come to their side to give them assistance if needed. Well, during the American Revolution, the battle started between the British and the revolutionaries throughout the New York State area and further south, the Americans. The British rattled our chain, and we came, but the Five Nations said, whoa, you know, hold back here. This is not our battle. You know, that's as part of the two roads, that's their battle to take care of and settle. However, Joseph Brant, who was a leader, he was a military leader. He was not a sachem or chief of the Confederacy, but he was a strong military leader. But he said, and he was adamant, but these battles are going to occur on our lands, and that created a split among the Confederacy because some are adamant we must stay out of that. We're going to be drawn into something we do not want to get into. It's not our fight, but we went forward, and as allies, it was kind of a contradiction. Either we're in or we're out, because we agreed to be allies of Great Britain and help them when they ever rattled the covenant chain for assistance. So the American Revolution happened, and the Treaty of Paris was signed, where they established the Canada-U.S. border where it is today. And Six Nations were never involved in the decisions of any of this. And actually, we felt very betrayed that Great Britain would sign something without consulting us, the owners of the land. And actually, it was the Six Nations stated to Brigadier General Alan McLean, the Six Nation Indians, from the surmises they have heard of the boundaries, look upon our conduct to them as treacherous and cruel. They told me they never could believe that our king would pretend to cede America was what was not his own to give, that they were the faithful allies of the King of England, but not his subjects. So he had no right to do this. It's basically what we blasted him about. So Sir Johnson, who was actually trying to be the peacemaker in all of this, the Superintendent General of Indian Affairs, on July 23rd, 1783, assured the Six Nations that they remain the owners of the lands as established by the 1768 treaty at Fort Stanwix, and no one can deprive them of those lands. Well, those are pretty hollow words, you know. They couldn't really enforce what was in there, because the lines were, we have the Fort Stanwix lines all along the Alleghenies, and all of these lands were to be ours. But this portion within here, and which was part of our the settlements along the Mohawk Valley and the Finger Lakes, that with the border being established, that would have felt under the U.S. domain. So as I said, his words were very hollow words. But to make things good for them again, to put us in a standing for the military strength we had, they established two settlements, and one happened to be at with Chief Degeronto at Tyndonega, and near Belleville. And the other one was here at Grand River, and it was the Haldimand Treaty, and it was laid out 6 miles deep. And October 25th, 1784, the lands would be 6 miles deep from each side of the Grand River, beginning at Lake Erie and extending that proportion to the head of the said river, which them and their posterity are to enjoy forever. Those are very significant words. And what the part of the promises was that we would hold these lands as the same as we held as to what was established before the Treaty of Paris line being established in the U.S. So what we did is we actually relocated on our treaty lands here in southern Ontario, lands we had earlier occupied and treated and fought over and conquered. But it was really one of the first meets and bounds described lands as allocated. As can be seen, it went from Lake Erie all the way up. It's supposed to go up to basically Highway 10. The unfortunate part is the treaty was never fulfilled, but this is a vast amount of area. That's what was supposed to be a promise to us in 1784, and this is all we have left. And 2000, what is it, 2021 today, less than 5%. And that's what begins the entire process of what I was working on. I started working on finding these documents. And so in 1975, and out of that we found that, and I guess I should give a bit of a pre-introduction. I started the research office in 1975. That meant going to the National Archives of Canada, Ontario Archives, New York State Libraries, the Chicago Newberry Library, and even access records in London, England, as we did have a student there who actually was helping us access the records there. So we've cataloged all these sought and found all these records. Keep in mind, now these are all the government records, because during this time period we couldn't read or write. So what we're actually moving forward was and defining and justifying our rights is actually the own government records and the promises that they made. So I think that's important for people to know. So at the source of the Grand River, the land was actually cut off near Fergus, Ontario. So it only went up to about that far. And we all know the Grand River goes much further up north. So when we did the history and analyze this, there's roughly 275,000 acres that are missing from the northern part of the grant that should have happened. In fact, when questioned, the king says the promise made to the Six Nations has to be honored and cannot be reduced unless it's by their acceptance, which we've never accepted. In fact, we actually even paid to have it resurveyed, the extent surveyed out, but that was put to a stop by the Indian agent over here at the time. So there's 275,000 acres. Now here's where the challenge right from the get-go starts. It's like a treaty land entitlement. People have heard about that. It's outstanding promises made in the treaty that weren't fulfilled. But sitting on that land today is a large population of innocent third parties who know nothing about this. They know absolutely nothing about the underlying titles and who and the promises made, and that it's under treaty land entitlement. And that's the entire problem that, it's not problem, challenge Six Nations are facing and moving forward to seek their true justice. What do we do with the people there who are innocent? And how do we get out, how do we resolve this and moving forward for 275,000 acres in southern Ontario? That's a powerful impact on how we're going to try and move forward. In other parts of the Alliance, in the southern portion, was were called life leases. United Empire Loyalists had come up to Six Nations. Some had married into Six Nations. and being strong military people, and they were our military allies with us during the wars, the American Revolution. They were granted life leases. And very significant, and the government deeds were drawn up, never to be granted to anyone else whomsoever. So basically those lands would stay Six Nations upon their death, or stay with the Indian side of the family upon their death, which never happened because the Crown between 1836 and 1851 issued free letters patent, just give that land away. So that's the question we're asking. By what authority did this happen? When we have your own government deed saying that was never intended to leave us. Because alienation, the alienation of our rights to the land was a very strange concept, one that we never, it was a strange concept to us. So that's why we entered into certain long-term conditional leases, reversionaries and so on. But there was never a surrender for sale. The Crown gave no payments were made. And that's what brings us to the issues. How do we get justice for that? And an area up here is the blocks 1 to 4. As I mentioned, the complete alienation of lands is a strange concept to us. So they were mortgaged, and Joseph Brant was allowed to nominate people to hold the mortgages, but the Crown entered into long-term 999-year mortgages as we agreed to. And from that mortgage, they were going to make payments to the Six Nations, for the Six Nations into our trust funds for the next 999 years, and there's 700 and some years left in that. And our history knows that we're not getting any revenue from these funds, from these lands. It's just, there's no revenue coming in today that we have a record of. And yet, there's a very large population on these properties. Block 4, letters patent were issued and mortgaged. And we're trying to find out what happened to the revenue from these over the 999 years, and where's that money today? Woolwich and Pilkington Townships, 86,000 acres. It's the same things. These lands were actually mortgaged to an individual who then subdivided it, and we don't know what happened to it, but we're still not receiving the long-term mortgage payments that was agreed upon. Block 2, I'll give you a bit of a more history on this one, a better breakdown, because this is one we followed up with some major in-depth research on, and it's quite a unique history. Block 2, as I said, was mortgaged for 999 years to Richard Beasley, James Wilson, and John Baptiste Rousseau was his real name. So a joint mortgage was executed. Then the mortgage was subdivided into separate mortgages. So all required the payments to be coming into us. In 1802, the Six Nations did not trust the Indian agents. They did not want the revenues from these four blocks to go to the Indian agent. They wanted this money to be kept where the King of England held his money. And actually, those payments were actually starting to happen. And they went to a financial institution in London, England. It was called Coutts and Company. And Coutts and Company were actually receiving this money. And in the early 1980s, we had done this research on the Block 2, and we're trying to follow the money and the payments made. But Coutts and Company, we contacted them as to, can you provide us with a financial statement, And lo and behold, this one individual, a lovely person over there, on her own time went into the archives of Coutts and Company. And I'll be darned if she didn't find our financial records. She had all of our records notarized, properly accounting done, and had the complete record set copied back to us and certified and copied back to us and provided at the Six Nations. Wonderful piece of history. And actually, it showed us that the monies that were held by Coutts and Company as a financial institution were accounted for as they should. But in the days of the mid-1850s, the Crown reps who were here in Canada, Upper Canada, Lower Canada, they're going through the time period, the various time periods here of transition of Canada becoming a country, is that they petitioned Coots and Company to have their Six Nations money transferred back over to Canada. And Coots and Company, being very articulate, specified that this is Six Nations monies, and that it would be used for the benefit of Six Nations money or whoever's entrustable. So we realized that the money came back. We did the tracking of it. It came back into the general coffers of the province and was used to run the country. So we're asking very much what happened to this, and there's been no other financial payments made on Block 2 since the 1850s, when the financial records from Coots and Company were sent back to Six Nations, while the finances were sent back to Canada to hold on our behalf. So that's one piece of history, and it's a long piece of history just to comment on this. But some of our other revenues were held at the Bank of Scotland. We contacted similar exercise with the Bank of Scotland, and we really didn't get any support or response other than the fact that they had no time. So we might have other money there. Maybe money's being paid there. We don't know, but it's our job to find out. And if it is, let's grab a hold of it and find out what's going on. So that was the Block 2. Block 3, Block 1 is basically the same thing. We don't have a record. If you look at the trust funds today, in Ottawa, there is no payments coming in for this 999-year mortgage on Block 1. That's for 94,000 acres. So from these 4 blocks, and what's there today, we should have enough money coming in actually to provide for the needs of Six Nations for our education, so we can get the more than 400 students that can go on to post-secondary education covered. We should have safe drinking water, which we don't have throughout our community. Proper housing. Housing's a crisis. Our housing needs is in terrible, terrible shape. Healthcare, with the present pandemic, we're very stressed out on this, very stressed out. I mean, all of the human needs that other people are benefiting from, there should be no need for us to be in a situation we're in. I'll give you a similar story for Block 5. Now, Joseph Brandt actually had, well, we won't get into the legality of whether he had the right to nominate purchasers for Block 5 and Block 6. But he did. He nominated purchasers, and we went through the same situation of long-term 999-year mortgages being issued, which is almost irrelevant because at the end of the day, the mortgages were never paid. Now, I'll give you we did the research, very much the research, again, through all the government's own records. Block 5 in 1798 was sold to William Jarvis. In 1803, the Crown ordered Block 5 returned to the Six Nations that Jarvis could not pay. But what's ironic about this, he actually was returned the money that he tried to pay and had made payments on, which is, we don't know what the justification for that would have been, but it happened. So then 1807, under the 999-year mortgage, Block 6 was sold to the Earl of Selkirk. Now, payments apparently were coming in, although they were sporadic, very sporadic. We were tracking them. But here's something Canada knows this, and they cannot deny that, the records are fudged or anything. On October 16, 1909, their own finance department reported to the Parliament that nothing has been paid on Block 5 since February 1853. So Canada knew payments ceased in 1853. Our office did the research on it. We filed the claims in '84. Canada validated in 1993. They basically said, that's right, mortgage payments stop. Now gets interesting. Everybody knows today if you quit paying your mortgage, what happens to the land? You get to keep it? Apparently, you do if it's against a native person, I guess. So anyways, the people on Block 5 are residing on Block 5 today. Our issue was validated in 1993. In 1994, Canada made a take it or leave it offer. Well, we'll offer you equivalent of $113.65 an acre to 65 cents an acre to settle this. Then if you don't like it, sue us. They're just arrogance. Well, actually, that's what started our litigation that I'll talk about in a little bit later. So when Caledonia started in 2006, there was the land situation happened, and it's ironic, in 2006, and there's one going on there today as we speak, with road blockages and land being taken over. But Canada had offered, well, let's talk about Block 5. Yes, that claim was validated. Yes, the offer was inappropriate. But as part of the research, it was revealed that, you know, the Earl of Selkirk had put his land up as collateral to secure his mortgage. So Canada says, well, if that's the case, you should be going after those people, because these were the lands he put up as collateral. 90 acres in Etobicoke. And there's major subdivisions here. You know, Canada's remedy is, well, you go after and you upset those people. Never mind that we failed to intervene and protect Six Nations interests as a trustee. That was their answer. You know, that was the honor of the Crown. It just revealed what they were about. Block 6, like I said, was there a valid surrender for this? We're saying no, but it's irrespective because there was never any executed mortgage for Block 6, and no payments were ever made likewise. So you just take these tracts of land alone and the revenue that should be generated from them. We shouldn't be without anything. We shouldn't be in Ottawa begging for money. We should be able to run our own governance here to our standards the way we want. Another item is the Welland Canal system. And in the 1824, this is down near, there's Lake Erie, it's near the mouth of those who don't know, it's near the mouth of the Grand River, off of Lake Erie. A scheme was established to build, as we all know, the Welland Canal system, which is today's the St. Lawrence Seaway. It's the beginning of, well, this is one of the beginnings of it. Excuse me. Is that a scheme was passed to actually dam up the Grand River to raise the level of the water so it would flow down and feed the Welland Canal system for the passage of boats, as I said, for today's St. Lawrence Seaway system. So the boats would go through the Niagara Falls, the Welland area, as it goes today, in fact. But mind you, they don't use this anymore. They got different technologies, but this was the beginning of it. So what happened, what occurred is that they flooded, the legislation says that, you know, pass through the lands and it would flood the lands and everybody would be paid for it. Well, being Six Nations were the owners of the lands, we never got paid for it. And it flooded almost 2,500 acres. As you can see, it's 2,478.30 acres. And it goes up almost to the town of Cayuga, which is up here. So it's a very large area. All riverfront property was flooded. So we went through the claims process, which I'll speak to very briefly because I won't give it that much attention. And we filed the claim and claim accepted for negotiations. It was validated and accepted. And validation really means that if you take us to court, you're going to win. That's because the Department of Justice, they weigh the liability factor. So let's go forward and try and make a negotiated settlement. But again, it's a take it or leave it offer. They made a $3 million offer to settle for 2,500 acres that was flooded in the 1830s when they actually began the flooding. But they later withdrew that offer. So, you know, it's very arbitrary, and that's the claims process that Canada established, and it hasn't changed to this date. And that's why our Six Nations will have nothing to do with that process. So in another parcel of land, here's the Six Nations here. You know, there's Hamilton today. We've got some land, 900 acres near in Innisfil, near Barrie, Ontario. And up here we have another 4,000 acres near East Hawkesbury, just downriver from Ottawa. So, and then people ask, like, how'd you get land there? You know, generally this is a good portion of our beaver hunting grounds as well, but that aside, the superintendent, remember I told you about how the Six Nations did not trust the Indian agents? Well, the deputy superintendent of Indian Affairs was found to have taken off with some of our funds. And actually, that's interesting because the money should have been going to London, England, or where the king held his money. But he was caught with $22,564.21 of our money that he couldn't account for, that he had spent. So the revenue that should have been coming in would have only sources of revenue coming in would have been from blocks 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those ones I described to you, as well as blocks 5 and 6. But he got caught. So to clear his name, he transferred the lands that he held in Innisfil and East Hawkesbury over to us to clear his name and avoid liabilities. Although he was still a Crown agent. It was done by a government agent, but the government intervened and they basically said that's the best you're going to get. So they virtually says we'll transfer that land to you. But just upon the transfer supposedly to us is that his heirs showed up and said no, that's our land, that was promised us, So they fought that transfer. They took it to court, and a passage of time. They argued back and forth. The lawyers were fighting it out back then. And of course, Canada was spending our money to fight this court case on our behalf. That's how they tried to justify it. But it went on and on and on, and no progress was being made. So then Canada, as a way to resolve it, paid out the heirs for any interest they might have had, and they used our money to do it. So I guess that was their wisdom of the day. So when the land went to get transferred to us, with such a long passage of time when an issue was finally resolved, by then the land had all been sold for tax purposes, and we had nothing. So we went through the claims process, and we documented all this. As sad as it was, Canada agreed. Yes, that's what happened. That's exactly what happened. You have valid claims to this. Not just to this land, but there's a whole bunch of scenarios back to why did we have to pay for it? Why do we have to pay out the heirs? Why did our legal fees have to be? Why did legal fees have to be charged to our accounts? But all we're talking about is the land. That's exactly what happened. That land should have been yours, and it wasn't. So these claims were validated, but we never got into any settlements. No settlement discussions at all. And they would have went anywhere because Canada's, we just learned it was take it or leave. We don't like it. And if we give you an offer, we can withdraw it. You know, so there was no stability. There was no honor in talking with the specific claims negotiators at all. Now, another area I'll talk about is the Brantford town plot. People are, you know, it's downriver from the university today. It's in Brantford. There's a Six Nations Reserve as it is today. But during the time period of you know, from the large tract of land, it was a very large tract of land. We do acknowledge that. In blocks 1 to 4, we want people on there. We wanted people on those tracts of lands. You know, that's why they entered into long-term mortgages for that. And we wanted a revenue stream for that. But the last part of the block number 1 actually came down to that. So the a good portion of the northern part, other than, as I said, the land that we have did not get from Fergus to Highway 10, which is still outstanding entitlement. The Block 1 boundary was north of that blue line. So these lands actually were all ours that the Six Nations congregated and really occupied. And the problem that was happening was trespassers and squatters, because this was all forested area. You know, large oaks and pines, and lumber, of course, being a very, very high commodity, was the Grand River actually during that time period was like the road into this part of Ontario. So it was very opened up. And with all the activities happened, like the Welland Canal and flooding of the Welland Canal, and I'll talk about it a bit later about the Grand River Navigation Company, squatting. It was a horrible, horrible situation. And although there were laws against it, you know, even if you reflect on the Royal Proclamation, they could not be trespassing on native lands. But there were subsequent statutes and regulations, promises made by the Indian agents to do their job and keep the squatters off. Never happened. In fact, I'll give you a little wander here. During the War of 1812, Sir Isaac Brock thought, okay, you know, I'm good relations with the Six Nations, they're strong allies, they'll come to fight for us. So when they approached the Six Nations at the time, they said, no, you know, we've got to stay home. We've got to stay home and protect our lands because you're not doing your job. We've got trespassers here, they're invading our territories, or, you know, they're trespassers. So actually it was Sir Isaac Brock passed a proclamation in 1812 promising protection of Six Nations land, and that all the squatters were to remove from our territory forthwith. Well, that was actually enough for convince the Six Nations, okay, we'll go fight. So with that, they called upon their brothers, the Ganawagi, Akwesasne, Tyendinaga, and they came down and fought at the Niagara frontier and kept the Canadian border where it is today. However, during the first week of the War of 1812, Sir Isaac Brock was killed. So the promise to get there and stop the squatting was never fulfilled. So one of the inducements, actually, I'll give you a bit of a background to this, because these are the kind of things that doesn't come out in when you deal with Canada and the claims process. Like, why did all this happen? What do you mean they're squatters? You got to get into a massive story, how this all links together. It's a never-ending story on these challenges. So with the squatting issue, and it was a major, major issue for Six Nations, the Indian agent had it in his concept, will you set aside 500 acres, Six Nations, and we will put all the squatters, make them relocate that area, would subdivide it into quarter-acre lots, and every lot will have to be paid for 10 pounds per lot, and it has to be paid for within 6 years. So those are the terms to allow it to go forward. And so Six Nations says, yeah, okay, but the squatting has to stop. That's the promise of this. That's the purpose of this. Well, the squatting never stopped. But in fulfilling the terms, the 500 acres somehow turned into 807 acres, which is an issue that we still have to bring up. We still has to be resolved. Besides the fact that squatting never stopped, so the terms of the purported surrender were never fulfilled. And the research office, and their very articulate research and historical records, going through Indian Affairs records, by the way, all Indian Affairs records, did a lot by lot analysis on were the quarter-acre lots, were the payments properly made, was that lot paid for in full for 10 pounds per lot, and was it paid off in 6 years? Well, the only ones that really, when they did the entire town plot of Brantford, is the light greens were properly paid for. And our question is, okay, it doesn't stop there. So what happened to the revenue, the money that was created from this? Was it the money that the Indian agent pocketed? Was it money used for other purposes? Or was it in fact invested into Six Nations? Prove that, Canada. And for all these other lots, we're sitting there like, how can you be on lands? Because we know free crown patents were issued for properties, just given to them. And patents issued. In fact, among the Six Nations, where I grew up, we never knew too much about all of our land rights issues here because it was kept from us. You know, the government did a very good job of keeping this for us, and we didn't. I certainly never knew anything about it until I started looking into this in 1975. But the only thing we remembered is Market Square in Brantford. That was always an area because it was a market, because we Six Nations people used to go up there to shop as well, trade goods up there and sell goods up there. But it was a free, they would never charge us for that. Well, because it was our land. Generally speaking, it was thought to be our land. So aside from the land sales never being fulfilled to the terms they had agreed to, aside from the 500 acres turning into 807 acres, you know, there's a massive amount of discrepancy. And here's the problem again. This is downtown Brantford as we know it today. What do you do with the people, the innocent third parties on there? How do we go forward and receive justice? That's the challenge we're faced. Like, we can prove it. Those are the issues. We can prove these things now. That's a real challenge. Now, in creative solution way of moving forward, I'll talk about this parcel of the land. I'll get into it later, but the Grand River Navigation Company had started and they were making the river navigable, and that was going to be a very economic boost to all of this area. But the Grand River Navigation Company, along with that, brought land speculators. And there was a gentleman here. This land originally was leased. Because of the mill there, we used to bring our products up there because the Grand River ran along there. We used to bring our products up there and he would let us grind all of our grains. That would be part of his lease payment to the Six Nations. No charge. But then the land speculator come along and he petitioned and he got this piece of land granted to him by the Crown because he had political connections. He was given it, 3 Crown letters patents. Not just this, but other parcels right in the downtown Brantford today. So we did the research and we filed the claim in 1995, laid this all out, but unfortunately Canada would not look at any more of Six Nations claims because it seemed like every time we did this research, Canada would counter research and they would say, you're right. And then when they would offer us $113 an acre, of course we weren't going to take that. They would throw up their hands and say, we can't negotiate with Six Nations. Or there was no negotiations. Here's $113 an acre, take it or leave it. That's not negotiations. So they just quit, they just refused to accept any more of our research. But in discussions, when Caledonia started, discussions in 2008, as a process to get the roads opened in Caledonia from the uprising, from the land takeover in 2006. And they tabled the fact, yes, that's true. Yes, that's a valid claim. Yes, you never got paid for it. Now, this is Canada and Ontario were at the table, and they both agreed to it, which is unique, because usually they just point fingers at each other. But what's sitting on that today is the Brantford Charity Casino, which has made billions for Ontario, well, a billion, more than a billion, and has provided nearly 100 million to the city of Brantford, being the host city. And Six Nations, to Canada and Ontario, both acknowledge those lands that were never paid for, get nothing. They were getting nothing. So in a creative move, Six Nations, when the Ontario government went through the privatization of the casinos in Ontario. And when they went to do the privatization of this, Six Nations intervened with the winning bidder, and we're going to do a judicial review of this matter and hold up everything. And the reality is, Ontario had been at the table before, acknowledged they weren't paid for it, acknowledged we have a court case against them for this lands and the rest of the Haldimand Tract, we were able to strike up, we'll call it like under the consultation accommodation policies that are out there, an accommodation agreement. As an interim use of this now, it's without prejudice to our legal court case that's going on, because we're not going to stop that. We're not going to stop that because it was put in abeyance once before and it was a horrible mistake. But we're not going to stop that court case. So to allow the privatization of this casino to go forward, it was negotiated over $100 million would come into this for the next 20 years. So that's about $4 million a year or so we're getting out of it. That is discretionary money, and it's not to be deducted for any other monies coming down. Right now they use it for health. They use it for, well, we had to use it to get water lines to our schools because they never had safe drinking water. And now this just happened like 2 years ago, 3 years ago. So it's very new, this concept. So this ongoing revenue stream coming to us, but we also had to make this agreement binding. So when a change in governments came in, they could not arbitrarily stop this. So this is the first principle, that anything we enter into has to have longevity to them and can't be undermined or changed by a subsequent change in provincial governments, because we know that what would have probably have happened if it wasn't so legally binding. So while the casino is not operating, we're still going to get our share, our money, $4 million plus whatever it is a year as Six Nations for us to use to meet our needs, our people's needs, elders, children, name it. And truly, I think a lot of it's going to be used up for the health and safety during this pandemic. So that's one creative way of moving forward. The city of Brantford are expanding and growing, and of course the Supreme Court of Canada has mentioned that, you know, has confirmed that there's a legal obligation to consult and accommodate where treaty and Aboriginal rights may be affected. Mind you, that's on the Crown. And where's the Crown today? That's the problem we're faced with. Because the Crown has stated, under the Municipal Act, that authority has been delegated to the municipalities. And the municipalities sitting there saying, we don't know what's going on. So we've taken Ontario and the city of Brantford to court. One of you have got to sit down and talk to us when there's developments going on, because there was a time when, you know, stoppages were happening in Brantford as well, and our people shouldn't have to be getting arrested to seek justice for our land rights. We shouldn't have to be going that far. And we point out to them, there's lands such as Clench Tract, lands that were never paid for, free grants, Brant Farms, free grants, Kerr Tract, free grants, Smith and Kirby Tract, those are free grants. Johnson Settlement, those were lands to be leased. Eagles Nest Tracts, lands to be leased. So all of these areas are all subject to documented issues that never paid for or were intended to be leases, but yet this is the economic backbone of the city of Brantford. And there's, you know, I don't know I can't remember what the population of the city of Brantford is, 80,000 people maybe. They're all on lands that they don't know all this. You know, they're innocent third parties, but they don't know this. So we got to get justice to this somehow. But the issue is, how do we come up with a resolution where we don't hurt people, where innocent third parties aren't hurt, but yet we are justly taken care of by the agreements that were entered into? How do we get justice? That's the thing, is how do we get a fair justice where it's going to be livable and we can go in harmony with our neighbors and with peace, friendship, and respect, which is the basis of all our treaties. That's the big challenge we're faced with. So as I pointed out, this is the original town plot of Brantford. It's much bigger than the 500 acres. Like I said, it's 807 acres. But not only did the trespassing not stop with the town plot of Brantford, more pressure was placed on Six Nations again. That some of the farmers didn't want it, some of the squatters would not want to live on in a little quarter-acre lot. So could we open it up, the Brantford Township, because they wanted to farm. They claimed they wanted a farm. So it was always to accommodate the newcomers into the, but what was worse than that is they were catering to the squatters because they had more pressure and they were thought of as people, or Native people weren't even considered people. So, you know, the government, although their legal responsibility was to protect Six Nations interests, their priority is to take care of the squatters. It became that. So the Six Nations again were promised to surrender Brantford Township to be sold. And this was also to stop the squatters, because it was going to address that they wanted to become farmers, that a quarter-acre lot weren't going to meet their needs and so on. So we agreed in terms, again, it was a conditional, but the squatting did not stop, obviously. So we went by lot, and transaction was land properly paid for because it was all evaluated, it was all appraised. We don't know where this money went. Well, we kind of know where the money went, and that's what's going to come out in our court case. So I got to be very careful how I answer talk about these issues, but the money certainly did not come and benefit Six Nations that it was intended to. In North Cayuga, there's Caledonia, there's the reserve, there's Caledonia, you go down river, there's a town plot of Cayuga. There's the Talbot Road, they call it. It's actually Highway 3 today. So they wanted to put Highway 3 through, or the Talbot Road through there. So to allow the road to go through. But part of that is they agreed to sell 100 acres on each side of the Talbot Road, but reserve 2 miles out from the river, because the Cayugas were actually residing here. I got a notice of bad quality. My internet here, I'm sorry. So we don't know how this land was ever put into third-party hands. We have no idea. But these lands were to be sold on either side. And really, we went through a lot-by-lot analysis, and we're requiring Canada, if it was sold, and was it properly sold, show us it was properly sold, because we know all of it was properly sold. But patents were issued left, right, and center on most of these lands. And then the question is, how come this land is not part of Six Nations holdings for the Cayugas? Canada has yet to even answer any of these questions to us. Probably the worst thing that ever happened to us with the Grand River Navigation Company, as I said, you know, this brought out the land speculators with a town plot town plot of Brantford that Nathan Gage first. But a statute was passed, Incorporated Navigation Company, in 1832, and it was approved and put forward. And part of that, they were allocated free Crown patents for lands along the Grand River, roughly 368 7/10 acres, for mill sites and dam sites and flooding, and just to make the navigation, just to make it navigable. So it commenced getting built in the 1830s, and like I said, 1837, when they needed land, they just went and got land. You know, never talked to us, just the Crown give it to them. But there was never any resources that went with that track. And the navigation company went from Brantford all the way down to the works of the Welland Canal. You saw it just below Cayuga from the earlier slides, the town of Cayuga. But there was never any revenues that came forth with that. So how did they finance this? Well, Six Nations was the only bank in town. And how were they able to access our trust funds? They placed the Indian agent as president of the navigation company. So he was, not only was he supposed to be watching out, protecting our best interests, he actually took our money to finance this operation. And what was appearing to happen, and why there's such a discrepancy of there not being land surrenders and just sales arbitrarily going forward, whenever they needed financial assistance to finance the navigation company works, they would just sell our land because the Indian agent had the in and out access to all of our resources, our lands, our timbers, everything. You know, and we went through we're very poverty down here. People were getting sick and dying. Regardless, the navigation company had to go forward. And it was in the 1920s. The Six Nations actually hired a lawyer found a lawyer who would work for us, A.G. Chisholm, out of London, Ontario. And so he started this, and he started looking into this matter, and he started the court case against Canada on this. Well, lo and behold, Canada did not like this, and for other reasons as well. I know there was a potlatch going. And when we hired our lawyers, and under the Indian Act that was being revised, and what the government of the day did, because we had hired a lawyer, A.G. Chisholm, to challenge them what they had done to us in the court system, they passed legislation forbidding us from independently going out and hiring lawyers to challenge what the Crown had done. So that pretty well negated our free access to our lawyers, access to justifiable access to lawyers. But then the Crown again would go out and they'd appoint their lawyers to assume challenge this court case, or appoint a lawyer to take on this court case. And that's exactly what Canada did. They hired a gentleman, a real estate lawyer out of Ottawa, and ended up in the Miller case. We did go to the Supreme Court of Canada, but what wasn't decided is because this matter had happened before Confederation, where the liability actually was. So we're picking that up in our 1995 court case against Canada and Ontario. So, you know, those are the kind of things that we had to go through. And we really had no freedom to lawyers up until the 1950s. So we had no case law it was a very long time for us. You know, and through the passage of time, many of these records have been lost. And that's the unfortunate part for other First Nations across Canada as well. So that was the navigation company. Now you bring that revenue stream forward. At the time, it was considered $160,000. We've gone through the records far more better now, and that amount is way excess of that. You bring that forward, it's a lot. It's a lot. Then we have other lands and townships of Dunn and parts of Moulton, Canberra, South Cayuga. And see, one of the scenarios that happens is during this time period, you know, we had a lot of needs and we were very poor. We were suffering people because our money was being spent elsewhere. And the inducement was to get other land surrenders in place, such as in South Cayuga, and trust to be sold for our benefit. Obviously, we needed the money. So the land sales occurred, and we don't know where that money went. And that's the accounting that needs to be done. Now, this is one of the interesting ones along the Caledonia. Some of you might be aware of the uprising in 2006. And again, there's another land takeover happened. It's presently going on, so I'm speaking here. This is the Six Nations Reserve today, and it hasn't changed. The boundaries really haven't changed since 1840s, because this is, you know, the less than 5% of our holdings out of the Haldimand Tract. That's all we're left with. But this side of southern Ontario was separated from that side of southern Ontario from the Haldimand Tract. So what legislators did is they established a road leading from Hamilton through to Port Dover, called the Hamilton-Port Dover Plank Road. They put it through, and they started actually in 1828 and passed the legislation and put it through, and we were supposed to be paid. You know, people on the north side who weren't part of the Haldimand Tract and might have had land, they were paid, and those on the south side likewise got paid, but the Six Nations never got paid. And the Crown acknowledges we weren't paid, but they tried to claim, well, it made your lands valuable, having a road. Well, it might have made some sense if we had agreed to surrender and sell our lands, But then that never happened. So once a road went through, and Six Nations did not want the town of they did not want no towns built in this area. They did not want nobody going through. So if they were going to go through, they were supposed to go all the way through, no stopping. But with the works of the Welland Canal Navigation Company, there were 2 mills set up here. In fact, one still stands as a historic site on the south side of the river. And one, there's a grist mill. The one sawmill on the north side that was taken down about in the early 1980s. However, the town part of Caledonia got built, so the residents then, without an agreement from Six Nations, it was built, laid out, and then pressure was placed on the Six Nations chiefs of the day that they wanted to be able to reside on this road. They wanted to have it sold to them, and Six Nations, we're not going to sell it. They won't sell it. But after much pressure, they actually agreed to lease it in 1835. So they were leasing these lands out in 1835. And leases were issued for 21-year periods with 7-year renewals. Government leases were issued, so it was a practice. But then they started free letters patents got issued. Some lands were paid for, or lease payments were given credit towards the payment of the land, so full payments weren't made as such on a normal land sale. And why was this happening? Well, of course, during this time period, the Grand River Navigation Company was broke, and Canada, the Crown, the Indian agent needed money to keep it afloat. So that's the history of this, and it's never been resolved. How did this land ever not become a Six Nations? Like, our reserve shouldn't have stopped there. And that's what keeps coming up, because Canada's never resolved it. In fact, when we had the discussions in 2008, Canada justified this thing. Their response from the legal representation representing Canada says, "Well, although there is no surrender, we believe you intended to surrender it." Now, how far they'll ever get in court on that one, that'll be interesting. So that's like I said, the town plot was laid out. There was a protest against laying it out, but it got laid out. So at the very least, when you go through the town plot of Caledonia, which we did, these are the lands of the navigation company, never paid for, given away for free. And if these lands were to be properly paid for, only the light green again shows the lands that were properly paid for. Again, where that money goes when they were paid for, and all the others weren't. There's issues with them. And when we show Canada this, they say, "Oh my gosh." Well, I mean, "Oh my gosh" doesn't resolve issues. So that's why there's so much, especially with Caledonia being located to the reserve. Well, we're doing without anything. Housing developments are carrying on land that's under dispute. That's what's really upsetting to us. It seems like it just goes on, and it's right next to us, and we have housing crisis, and then we have people moving in from elsewhere into these areas that there's no equity here. And like I say, there's the Johnson settlement, Brantford town plot, Martin's Tract, these areas. By order and council of 1843, they were set aside to be reserved. And like I showed you, much of the city of Brantford today, this is their economic backbone. But there were lands that were to be leased. There's no surrender for sale. The Crown acknowledges the order and council of 1843 because they issued it. Another area is the Birch Tract. And one of the items that was brought up is that if we were to reduce our holdings, like this is all Six Nations lands at this point, well, it still is for that matter, because everything, like I say, this is a never-ending story. This is the present reserve today. But Six Nations were convinced, and we're always very protective of the Birch Tract. This Birch Tract has squatters on it, and we had them removed once. In fact, our trust funds actually removed them once and paid them for their improvements under the wisdom of the Indian agent. We have no idea why he would do that, but no sooner were they gone than other squatters came in and took over their homes. But these were always to be it because the original township of Brantford came along the Mount Pleasant Road. This was never part of Brantford Township, and we don't have no idea how it happened to become Brantford Township today. Because the reserve was to extend up to that Mount Pleasant Road. So we always wanted that property. But one of as ours, well, it was ours, but we wanted the trespassers cleared. So the wheeling dealing Indian agent said, well, if you reduce your holdings on the south side, on the north side of the river, we'll certainly guarantee you get Bert's Tract. The Six Nations, reluctantly, they agreed. Again, it was on a condition to get that land. So the lands on the north side were set aside for us, and all we got was this. But we had agreed, and the Indian agent had agreed and mapped out all of this area was to be ours, and it never was. And we never got Bert's Tract. So there was never an agreement then to relinquish any of our holdings on the north side of the river. There's nothing. There is absolutely nothing. It was just an ongoing bumbling of Indian agents trying to manipulate things to appease the squatters. And at the bottom of the mouth of the Grand River, at Lake Erie, there was an ordnance reserve. This is 75 acres. It was actually a military site because the War of 1812, they used to bring the ships in and hide them in the river here because there was a narrow opening and they could protect that. So they had a naval base set up, and there was one established, and Six Nations says, yeah, you can use it for the naval base, you know, for as long as that you need it for the military purpose. It's very much the same. Those who might know some history about the Ipperwash site, that was set aside for a military base for military training and being along the lakes. So, you know the story of that. When they got it back, it was never ever cleaned up, but they refused to give it back. But it's still Six Nations lands. So, excuse me, it was still up at the Indian land up there at Ipperwash. But this land's here, you know, since there's been no war since the War of 1812. These lands should have come back to us, but right down there now is a cottage. It's all full of cottages and sites. And free letters patents were issued in 1917, between 1917 and 1940. And we're asking, you know, Canada, why would you do this? You know the conditions of how you got that land. It was for military purposes alone. Sherbrooke Township, Six Nations, we're going to set that aside for lawyers, or William Dixon, and other to do legal work for us. But he was never allowed to do any legal work. So we got excluded from reported surrenders. Now these are lands that are just kind of lost. This is the beginning of block, as I said, block number 1 only went to the northern side of that blue line. And the Brantford Township, that was actually surrendered on condition the squatters would stop, went to the south side of the orange line. So there is nothing, and whether I believe it's just the surveys or inaccuracies, there's nothing that allows for the legal alienation of any of these lands. And we're sitting here today, we have Paris, Ontario in there. We have a lot of farms, innocent third parties again. How do we get through this? How do we resolve these factors? Where Six Nations get justice and we're able to live with our neighbors in peace, friendship, and respect. So I try to lay out for you. There's so many inaccuracies, and you just can't pick on one site. You got to kind of get the history of what was going on that time. What happened? Why was this? How did this land not become Six Nations? Well, they promised to give us this land. They promised to remove the squatters. None of these were fulfilled. So it's going to be an interesting outcome of our court case. But the last real notice given was in 1844, January 22nd. It was a public notice. He was representing the Governor General by Samuel P. Jarvis, who, by the way, also got caught stealing our funds. is that everybody was supposed to remove from the Six Nations on the south side of the Grand River between the townships of Brantford and Dunn, because that was to be the Six Nations tract, Six Nations lands. So these should have been the lands of the Six Nations on the south side, all the way down to South Cuba. There's Dunn Township. And all we have here is today. We don't have this, so there's really nothing that alienates any of these lands on the north side. And like the Hamilton, Port Dover, Plank Road lands, that was to be leased. The Cuga, this side of the north side, 2 miles back, should be still lands that were actually to be reserved for the Cuga Nation, but part of the Six Nations, and it's not. So these are very interesting questions. How do we get through this? Now, these are examples of Six Nations funds taken and used by the Crown for purposes other than the Six Nations. Upper Canada bank stocks, government debts. How come we were paying down the government debts? Churches, bridges, again government debts. Country's war losses. Well, the only war that was happening was the Upper Canada, the rebellion going on, and we weren't a part of that, but we were paying for it. There's Jordan Canal, Erie and Ontario Railway Company, District, Simcoe District, City of Toronto, build roads in York, Toronto, Welland Canal. Like I said, not only did they flood 2,500 acres of our lands from Dunnville, between Dunnville and Cuga, and not pay us for it, they used our money to do it. Law Society of Upper Canada, McGill College. McGill, they weren't broke in the 1840s. Six Nations trust funds were used to bail out McGill. And yet, we went and spoke to McGill about this, and we challenged them as far as ethics or what have you. Can we not make an allowance somehow to set aside a couple seats for Six Nations students? Don't diminish your credentials to get in, or criteria, because we need doctors, we need engineers, many of the classes you have, expertise, because our people can't afford to go to university in most cases. And that never went anywhere. They said, well, we don't know. We got the money from Canada. We didn't know that was your funds. That's not our business. And, I applaud what Waterloo is doing and engaging in these discussions and trying to work. And we do have many ongoing sessions working with the university of relationship building and actually providing some good assistance to us in different other fields. And believe me, it's very much appreciated. But McGill, we just got the door closed on this. 15,000 public works. We were building infrastructure of Canada that people today are enjoying. Haldimand, Upper Canada Building Fund. Right, we haven't done the fact where that actually what that does support. And then we have other ones about the support Upper Canada, and assumed by the province and it was just taken over. Montreal Turnpike, District of Niagara. So those are just examples of money taken out of our trust funds. There's many, many, many more, because Six Nations was the only bank. See, you could see, so our money came back. I'll give you the example I spoke from before. From the holding, Coots and Company came in back here and was used to dished out to run Canada. So the Block 5 claims that we were to bring them forward, Innisfil, Hawkesbury, Nathan Gage lands. Samuel Jarvis, he was the Indian agent who took money from us. Welland Canal. We add those up, the amounts compounded, bring it forward is ridiculous. And the money's not the answer here. I think a lot of it is going to be based on relationship building. But money, we also need a much larger land base, because we have the same land that we were squashed into in 1844. Our population has exploded. We're caretakers. Canada's largest Carolinian forest is putting major pressure on our forest management system down here. There's just so much stress and strain. And then with the climate change initiatives, of course, trees are the safest way to go. But anyways, I'm getting carried away. So as I said, in Block 5, when they offered us $113 an acre and take it or leave it, and arrogantly said, if you don't like it, take us to court. Well, we took them to court. But we took them to court on everything. We took them to court on the entire Haldimand tract. We took them to court on the outstanding land entitlement up at the head of the Grand River, the 275,000 acres. We took them to court on the navigation company. We took them to court on the Welland Canal. We've taken them to court on everything. And all the mines, all the minerals, all the timber. What did you do with this wealth that was promised the Six Nations? And that will actually be getting in. There's about 34,000 documents that we've been going through and analyzing, arguing, trying to narrow it down. And it's both Canada and Ontario, because we had to take both of them, because they always do the finger pointing, you know, you're liable, no, you're liable. And we will be in court next year on this big time. The duty to consult and accommodate. We took the city of Brantford and Ontario government to court, but we put this one on hold, and there's a legal term for it. We can bring it up at any time because we need a decision. Ontario says you're responsible to consult and accommodate with Six Nations on all the developments in your area. The city of Brantford says no. The Supreme Court of Canada says that's a responsibility of the Crown, which I totally agree with. But the Ontario, as I said before, under the Municipal Act, that was delegated to you to do, the municipalities. So in reality, all the municipalities in the Haldimand tract, if you take Ontario's definition, should be dealing with us. And some are. Don't get me wrong, some are. Some aren't. But then we're trying to work out what does that mean? Just sending us a piece of paper, hey, we're going to put up a high rise here and get out of the way. That doesn't go anywhere. So there's got to be meaningful consultation and where appropriate accommodation. So that's where we are at today. As I said, we're in the courts. We will be, depending on the court dates, this pandemic's going to put things back, but we'll be there next year. We're ready to go. And hopefully we'll see justice. But what we want to be able to see is long-term arrangements. We want to see our agreements entered into that we entered in honored. You know, whether it's revenue sharing from like the aggregate pits that are going on. They pay virtually nothing in many municipalities. They get paid for their being in their area, just like the city of Brantford with the casino. They get money for the casino being in their municipality. You know, counties or cities, more counties get financial money to compensate them for the gravel pit being in their municipality. But yet all these resources that are being taken are ours. So these are the challenges. How are we going to resolve this? You know, this is going to be such a phenomenally intricate court case, and it totally reverses the whole mechanism where Canada has a specific claims policy, but all of their policies mean you have to extinguish your children's interest if you want a settlement. And we cannot do that. As I said before, under the terms of the Haldimand Treaty, which them and their posterity are to enjoy forever. We have no right to extinguish our children's land. We have no right. Thank you very much.
Wow, Phil. I don't know what to say. This is a lot of extremely important information to take in. It's fantastic. Thank you, Chumigwech, for sharing your knowledge with us, and for this is such highly important information. It's factual and documented.
Yes.
And for you to devote your life's work to kind of putting this all together and to working on this is super important. I feel so lucky that you're here with us today and that you're sharing this information with us. it's highly relevant to us all, to
Yes.
everybody in Canada, I would say, but
Yes.
especially to all of us here who study and work and live on the Haldimand Tract. I really hope to share this widely, and I hope that a lot of people take it in, because it creates an understanding of what's going on today and why the things that are happening today are happening.
Yes.
Yeah. So Phil,
There's-
yep, sorry, go ahead.
No, there's the frustration, and as I said before, our people shouldn't have to be going out and get arrested for justice.
Yeah.
And we have Canada, you can blame Ontario, you can blame, well, actually, Canada blames the provinces blame Canada. And then among them, they blame, oh, that was the other party, that was the other governing party. We've been through them all. We've been to the United Nations. We brought this issue to the United Nations. We've tried every possible way to do the right thing. Given how we move forward as good neighbors. We don't want to hurt anybody. Two wrongs aren't going to make a right here. We want to be able to move forward, receive our justice, and continue with our neighbors with peace, friendship, and respect. And those are the principles of our treaties, and that's how we want to move forward. So the education, people don't know what they don't know, so I very much appreciate this opportunity to educate people, because I grew up, we never knew this. It was kept from us because we were on the reserve, and we're all in the school teachers they were controlled by what we were able to learn. But First Nations in Canada don't know their history like this. It's a powerful history we have, and that's what I want to. When I leave, that's what I want to leave.
Yeah. Well, I think you're achieving that by sharing information like this with those of us.
Yeah.
So Phil, on behalf of the University of Waterloo, I want to say Chimigwech, thank you, Nyawan, for being here with us and for sharing your time and delivering this knowledge to the community.
Okay.
Miigwech.
Welcome.